Hey folks, welcome back to Green Iron TV. We're down in the garage here and we have the hood up on our 1967 Jeep M715. And that is because the 230 Tornado inline 6 motor in the Jeep is junk. So we're going to explore that here on Green Iron TV today. So stay tuned and make sure you take a moment, check out the link in the description down below for the Green Iron TV merch store. Things like hats, t-shirts, sweatshirts, all kinds of cool stuff in there. So check that stuff out. Well, folks, that's right. According to everybody, the 230 motor in the Jeep 715 series trucks is junk. And the first thing we need to do is rip this thing out and throw it away. That's what everybody expects to be done. So, is that right? Or is there anything that can be done with this motor? Let's take a look at that. Well, of course our motor's not junk. This motor runs great. Super smooth, and we have no problems with this motor. But if you listen to anybody out there on the internet, that's the first thing they tell you you need to do with one of these trucks is to rip that 230 motor out and throw it away. You just can't live with this truck with this motor. And guess what? They're wrong. All right? Not everybody wants to have a big mud truck or monster truck or anything else. Some of us actually enjoy a fully restored truck, and this truck is restored back to original shape like it would have been while I was served in the U.S. military, and I absolutely love it. This is a great running little motor. Yes. Is it gutless? I wouldn't call it gutless. I mean, it's 132 horsepower. It's certainly not going to set your hair on fire by any means, but when these are in good running condition, they make a great motor. This thing runs like a sewing machine, just smooth as could be, and I have no problem running down the road at 55 mile an hour if I need to. I'd rather run, right around 50 mile an hour, but there's a great misunderstanding with the motor, and it, for whatever reason, keeps getting perpetuated out on the internet, and everybody that's all they chirp about is how this is such a crap motor, how this motor needs to be, just junked and thrown away. The first thing anybody that gets one of these things should rip it out and throw it away. And they're obviously wrong, because when these are in good shape, these are great motors. Now, the big thing you have to remember is, what was this truck designed for? And that's the biggest problem people have. Everybody wants to take one of these trucks and run 65, 70 down the highway and, use it as your daily driver and whatnot. That is not what these trucks were designed for. And the sooner you come to that realization, the sooner you can fall in love with the 230 that's in these things. You have to remember the time period that these trucks were developed. And so you have to think back to the 1960s and into the early 1960s. So this truck is basically what the military asked for as far as specs. And so the big thing you have to remember is that the vehicle that it was replacing, the M37 Dodge, also a 230 inline 6, is not much more. It's far less power and far less speed than this vehicle. And so, what the Army was looking to do was gain a little bit more stuff. And These trucks were great performing trucks when they were brand new. So, what was the major design for these trucks? Well, you have to remember, the Army at that point was looking for a vehicle that could keep up with convoy speeds. And let's face it, in the 1960s, what was convoy speed? 45 mile an hour. So they wanted a truck that could run 45 mile an hour with a full load and have no problems. This truck with that 230, that'll do that all day long. All right. The other thing you have to remember is that this truck was, a 5/4 ton truck, but you have to, this is the first of what, now is commonly referred to as the CUCV, or civilian, vehicles that use production civilian parts. All right. So this was dabbling their feet into that with some production pieces. The front half of this vehicle, the cab, the main cab, fenders, and hood are all standard Jeep truck parts, and even the 230. So the 230 was a motor developed for their trucks, and in the early 1960s, this was a standard motor in their trucks. You have to remember, Jeep didn't have a V8 until the early 70s, when they combined with AMC and started using the AMC motors. So, yes, they used some of the Buick V8s at the time, but for the military contract, the entire vehicle had to be from one manufacturer. So you couldn't have Jeep body with a Buick motor and stuff like that. Just too many different supply line problems. So Jeep went with the obvious answer they had, which was their 230 inline 6. Made a few changes to make it meet the military contract requirements. So it does have a few different things compared to the civilian one. The front engine cover and stuff's a little bit different because of how the motor mounts were. So that means it also has a different style water pump and a few things like that. But a lot of the main stuff is very similar. And of course, the 24-volt system with waterproof spark plugs, all that, that's all standard military stuff. So, Jeep used this motor because it's what they had. And of course, they used this motor because it's all that was required. I'm sure if they had a big V8 at the time, they may have tried to stick it in there, but there was no need for it. And, without the need, the object for a military contract is to build the best vehicle you can build for the cheapest price. Let's face it, Uncle Sugar's cheap. And so when you bid a contract, you're bidding at the lowest price. So if you can use existing componentry and save money, that was the big thing. And that's what won the contract for these. So, it made a nice, it made for an easy transition for Jeep to build these. Unlike the Dodge, the M37 Dodges, which had been in production since '51. Every time the government needed Dodge M37s, Dodge had to change tooling on the line to build the M37 to the specs that the military wanted, and then change back over to civilian. So by using the civilian componentry, it was very easy for Jeep to not have to change very much tooling to be able to roll these off the production line. So it was a big cost savings to Jeep to do a design like this. But more importantly, what caused this Jeep to develop such a bad reputation in the United States military that even to this day, that reputation carries on and people still spout it as reasons to not run this vehicle or to yank the motor out of this vehicle. So one of the things is there is some design flaw to the motor. And this is a overhead cam. And this was one of the first overhead cam motors that was used for military service. So therefore, at that time, military mechanics didn't have a very good knowledge or experience with overhead cam motors. So when problems arose, they didn't know how to fix it as easy. So that kind of turned them off. But more importantly, the problem that this motor had was when you over revved it and you held it at high RPMs for long periods of time, in an over rev situation, you had a tendency to oil starve towards the back of the motor. And that's the inherent design flaw in it. And so as you starve that oil, it will start to chew up the overhead camshaft, which then creates running issues for the motor. So wasn't that big of a deal during the pre-production testing, all that type of stuff, because the test people and the running the test at Aberdeen and at Yuma, they were driving the vehicle well within its means, and it didn't develop that didn't rear its head until GIs got to it. And I always say that this vehicle is unfortunately a victim of its time. So the previous M37 Dodge developed in the early 1950s. And when you drive that truck, if you try and over rev it, you drive faster than 45 miles an hour for extended periods of time, that truck lets you know. And it sounds like the world is going to come apart. It sounds destructive. So, if you're driving that truck and you're over revving it and whatnot, it lets you know real easy, and you kind of naturally backed out of it. Where this motor ran so smooth and stuff like that, that you really didn't notice that. You didn't notice you were doing damage to the motor by over revving it. And so that led to failures. So like I said, I think the biggest problem is the time period. So when you had the early Dodge in the 50s and early 60s, let's face it, you had, young GIs that maybe were used to driving, farm trucks around. And of course, farm trucks were all 6 cylinders back in that time period. There weren't big V8 trucks and stuff like that. They had some V8 trucks, but most all the trucks, and especially farm trucks, were, straight 6s, and that's just what people grew up driving. Most cars back then were straight 6. But during that time period, so, probably should talk about the development of the vehicle. So the government set specifications in late 1964 for what they were looking for in a vehicle. The contracts were then written in 1965. Jeep submitted their contracts, and in March of 1966, the Jeep was selected and then went into production, and by January of 1967, they were rolling off the production line for induction into the military service. So what happened is in that time period from 1964 to 1967, you get the start of the muscle car craze and the V8s and all the big power and stuff like that. And so when you get to 1967 and a little bit later, you end up with a bunch of young GIs who are used to now driving muscle cars, fast cars, and stuff like that. And now all of a sudden, you put them in a vehicle that's not designed to be driven like that. And sure enough, they're going to try and drive it like a muscle car, like a hot rod, and they over rev the motor. And before long, you eat up that cam and have a motor failure. So it is important to note that the problem was diagnosed and quickly fixed. So by early 1968, Jeep puts a governor on these vehicles, and it governs the RPMs so that you couldn't over rev the motor and destroy them. That was the thing. But by that time, of course, the reputation was out, and although the old motor pool sergeants, these things are junk, I don't want them, I don't want to use them, and that mentality has transpired even through to all the way today. But these motors in good shape, in good running condition, and as long as you drive it within the design parameters of what the Jeep was designed for, they run great, they perform great, and they are super, super smooth. This vehicle has no problem with power. I can, like I said, zip along 50, 55 mile an hour, no problem. And there's no need to go ripping a perfectly good motor out. But because these vehicles are not necessarily lower production, you still had 33,000 of these vehicles built, all right? But because these are a lower quantity of vehicles than several of the other styles of vehicles, parts for these motors can get not necessarily hard. There are some parts that are harder to find, and it just takes being resourceful and doing your due diligence and searching around. The parts are out there for them. You may have to pay for them, and some of the parts may start getting expensive and so forth like that, but they're out there. But because the rarity of some of the parts and the prices, I can understand why people, if you have a bad motor, one that's locked up or blown up or whatever, I can understand the need to switch and put a different motor in it. But what I don't get is this inkling that perpetuates around the internet that every single one of these motors needs to be ripped out and thrown away. That is just plain wrong, and I'm here to try and stop that mentality. I want you guys to keep the 230 in there and enjoy the truck how it was designed. Now, and I've said this in some of my videos before, if you want to go 70 mile an hour on the highway and have air conditioning and radio and stuff like that, guess what? Get a new vehicle, all right? Quit trying to make something that was never designed to do that, all right? Yes, they are cool vehicles. They look cool. They have some cool nostalgia to it. But, it's far easier to just go get a new Chevy, Ford, Dodge, truck, whatever, and drive that as your daily driver, all right? These make beautiful back road cruisers, farm trucks, stuff where 50 mile an hour, no problem. So, if you are one of those guys that keeps throwing that out there that you need to rip this 230 out and throw it away and throw a 350 Chevy or whatever in, stop, man. There's no need, all right? I get it. You think you have the coolest thing on the block? That's your opinion, not mine. So there's no need to just keep throwing that out there everywhere. But yeah, if you do have a blown up motor, yeah, it might be easier to throw a 350 Chevy in there, but if you got a good running 230, even if it's a 230 that just needs a little fiddling with, great motor. And it's a great way to keep the vehicle original and have fun with the vehicle. You know, that's the whole point of having one of these old trucks, is to have fun with it. And I take mine to tons of parades and shows and events, and it just wouldn't be the same, you know, to show up with this thing with, you know, with a completely mismatched motor and drivetrain and stuff like that. Yeah, it may look cool, but it doesn't honor the vehicle. And I want these vehicles to, or I want my vehicles to be a good reflection of the originality of them. And that's what I want people to enjoy with them. So, you know, when you see my stuff at a show or a parade or whatever, I'm trying to represent. And of course, this truck's 1967, so I'm trying to represent 1967. So, anyway, you know, I don't want to be Debbie Downer. I'm not trying to be down on the guys that have V8 swapped into them. Like I said, hey, that's their truck, their prerogative, and guess what? The way I look at it is every time you destroy one of these trucks by cutting it up and modifying it, it only makes mine, which is original, that much more valuable. Now, it does irk me a little bit when people take good trucks that have a good motor, good running condition, and are completely restorable trucks, and cut those up and, you know, to make whatever configuration they want out of them. It drives me nuts a little bit, because that's taking one less restorable vehicle off the world. You know, there's plenty of these that are beat up, that have already been modified, have been cut on. You know, they've gone through fire departments and forestry services and had all kinds of things done to them. So, you know, leave the original ones alone. Let the guys that want to restore them, and do what you want with with the modded ones. Well, folks, that's all I have for you today here on Green Iron TV. You know, for those of you that have M715s or M725 ambulances, or 726 contract maintenance truck, stuff like that. For those of you that have kept the original 230 in it, good for you. I applaud you. Way to enjoy the truck as it was designed. And for those of you guys that have modified them, hey, it's your truck. Do what you want with it. Just don't be so negative against those guys that have decided to keep them original. That's the biggest thing I got to say. So anyway, I want to thank you guys for following along like always. And of course, take the moment, check out the link in the description down below for the Green Iron TV merchandise store. We have these cool M715 t-shirts in there if you want to honor an M715. We have them for all the other vehicles, the M38, the M725 ambulance, the M37. So we have all kinds of different vehicle t-shirts in there, and take a moment, check it out. Every little bit that we get from selling t-shirts and merchandise, I just turn around and use that to pour right back into these vehicles to keep them going, and to help us get them out to parades and shows and events, and help educate the public about the historic military vehicles and what they represent. So, like always, I want to thank you guys for following along and watching. And of course, I hope you guys have a great day.